How's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on a new episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh, and we're just doing a new album review today. Today is episode 54 of the podcast, and depending on what date it is now, since this is late at night, we are officially at the year mark of this podcast. I know that's not like super exciting if this is your first time listening, or if you don't really tune in all so often, but yeah, it seems like in the midst of quarantine about a year ago, I really didn't have much to do, or I guess much going on, but I'm in a bit of a different place than I was about a year ago as well. But I didn't know what I was really doing. I still don't really know what I'm doing, honestly. But yeah, a year since I did that Strokes album review of the new Abnormal, which it seems like, wow, that was... Still doesn't seem like it was that long ago, honestly. But, just felt like putting that out there. For the year, for this year review, even though it's really just a regular album review, we're reviewing the latest Small Black album, from the synthwave indie pop band, dream pop band, whatever you want to classify them as, just on April 9th, titled Cheap Dreams. So yeah, just look forward to that if you are interested in hearing my thoughts on this album. But just before we get started, some more announcements for the podcast. Put out a YouTube only episode a couple days ago, or about a day ago actually, titled just track reviews, various track reviews, Girl in Red, Dark Side, London Grammar, Dayglow. It's on the YouTube channel, just search the Music Reviewer. You'll see all the familiar podcasts I've done in the past, all the album reviews and best and worst tracks of the week. Thanks for anyone that's listened to that YouTube only version of the podcast. I appreciate that. And let's see what else. Best and worst track of the week for the week of April 17th. Dropped it about a week ago at this point. Demi Lovato and Ariana Grande dropped a pretty cool track. They got best track of the week, and versus Lil TJ for worst track of the week. Honestly, don't really remember the Lil TJ track that much anymore, other than it had Offset and Moneybagg Yo. Not too surprised just by those features that it did bad. But I also covered some Taylor Swift, BTS, Olivia Rodrigo, Roddy Ricch, and newer artist Duncan Lawrence. But yeah, new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week should drop in a few days as well. I also have some more reviews coming down the pipeline. But anyways, let's just get into the gist of this review for the latest Small Black album. Alright, so like I said earlier, the latest album is titled Cheap Dream. The band is Small Black, and just a little brief introduction to the band if you're not familiar with them. Small Black is classified as an indie band from Brooklyn, New York. However, they can really be classified as a band with heavy leanings to modern dream pop and synth pop. As of today, they're signed to George Clanton's label, 100% Electronica. If you're not familiar with that label, it is a pretty interesting concept by George Clanton. The vaporwave and chillwave electronic musician that is certainly developed his own, I guess, cult following, and his DIY record label is 100% Electronica. So I think his girlfriend's on there and amongst other artists, but Small Black is really the first band that I have listened to, aside from having any knowledge of George Clanton, that is now on this label. So that's, it's just something that's pretty interesting to see. At around 2019, the band emerged after finishing the completion of their debut EP, Small Black, self-titled. The band wanted to have a sort of lo-fi sensibility at first, but were somehow also categorized as being in the chillwave scene earlier in their career, just as the genre was at its height. And just by listening to a few Small Black tracks, that's probably not a surprise. I mean, they are very synth-driven, and the aesthetic kind of fits the shoe in a sense, with other acts that were categorized, such as Washed Out, who they went on tour with, Tori Ma, Neon Indian, the rest. But anyways, the band's first recordings were also recorded in a basement, very DIY environment. So I guess that really just ties into like the lo-fi, I guess, aesthetic they're going for. In the early to mid 2010s, the band had numerous appearances among the festival circuit and developed some credibility as an emerging band, with various tracks garnering attention on indie alt radio stations at the time, accompanied by much critical acclaim. The band's members are also credited with having various accomplishments amongst various media types. Guitarist Ryan Hayner was formerly in a hardcore band. Drummer Jeff Curtin is credited with providing drums on Wild Nothing's Nocturne, an excellent album, one of my favorite albums of all time. Juan Pizanski, probably didn't say that right, was also the host of an old show, Juan's Basement, a music interview show, part of Pitchfork's media network at one point. I don't think that exists anymore, but fun fact right there, if you ever were knowledgeable of Juan's Basement. And yeah, just personally, I've really been into Small Black for the past few years. My interest in the band probably peaked around somewhere around 2017, 2018, especially when I was starting to really heavily get into this album they released in 2013 titled Limits of Desire. The album honestly features a lot of great tracks. If you're familiar with the album, some of the highlights are No Stranger, Sophie, Breathless, Proper Spirit, Only a Shadow, synth-pop. You're probably familiar with one or two of those tracks. They honestly aren't any secret. They're great. It's great work off of that album, and it even led me to, at some point, seeing them live perform in Austin, and like this sort of comeback show that was really random. It was, I think, some random Thursday or maybe Friday night in the middle of summer, for free at Mohawk, if you're familiar with that venue. And they were just kind of coming back from hiatus, and that's when they announced they were working on this album that has transpired, Cheap Dream. And yeah, that's kind of just my discovery of the band in a nutshell. And it has been a bit since they've released an album. I believe their latest album prior to Cheap Dreams was released, I believe, in 2015 with Best Blues. So it has been, I guess, roughly 6 years since the band has put out an official, I guess, body of work. And a lot has come out between now and then. A lot of their contemporaries and similar bands have put out a few albums since then, too. And also with, like, the sort of niche that this kind of band sits in and the kind of genre they're in. Live music is a huge factor, I guess, when putting out projects. So it just kind of sucks to know that this project probably can't be toured on right as it's being released. And that's an issue for most artists anyways, but I really feel like the live music aspects to albums like this are super important as well. It's just good to see that it finally made its way to the listener, which, thank you, Small Black, for putting out an album when I'm sure it was a difficult decision to put one out. For that, if you're familiar with the format of usually album reviews, I just like going through the most previous album or the most recent one prior to this one here, just to get kind of a sense of where the band was at or where the artist was at. And Best Blues, even though I will not say it was as concise and solid as Limits of Desire, I still found like the album had some charm to it. There were solid tracks like No One Wants It to Happen to You. The track features a rumbly bass line guiding the track with some pop sensibility off the route, especially with the catchy chorus that's constantly reiterated throughout the track. Boy's Life is one of the band's better known tracks as well, that I'm sure most heavy listeners of like synth or dream pop have heard at some point while putting on like a Spotify playlist or radio. Back at Bells is another good track, one that I think I just discovered. It's an up-tempo track with some lush and relaxing synth textures that just envelop the listener. The track has some stark similarities to prominent chillwave music as well. One of the better tracks on the album. Checkpoints has a melodic, dirty, and gritty bass line that opens up the track with like a captivating, energetic nature. it's a nice shift in the album overall. Smoke Around the Bend kept the pace up as well with its driving and bouncy bass line guiding the track amongst various chirpy electronic embellishments. And Century XX featured some slow down industrial elements that provided some like needed variance in color in the context of the album. And this track had like some overall grit to it that I thought was good as well. And I guess just overall, this album was consistent with what one would expect on a Small Black album. It really wasn't anything, I guess, out of the ordinary for the band or experimental. There were some highs and lows too, but the album picked itself up in the later half of the album, and overall it's a good record. So with this latest release here, Cheap Dream, start with the opening track here, Tampa. This track has been out for some time, or it was the first single released, and I kind of had some time to sit on it, but in the whole context of the album, I really don't think it fits too well to be an opening track. The track is, it has a consistent energy to it. It feels quite subdued for the entirety of the track. Typical of this brand of like dream and synth pop, I guess, but the tempo that the track follows, it really makes it dragged out a bit. There's also a sensitivity that's like derived from the vocals on this track that just feels like a bit familiar, maybe similar to like the style of how like 80s hair metal bands sung their ballads. And the slowed down tempo on this track really attests to that as well. The more ambient sections towards the end of the track, though, where we get some more voices added and some added density in the synths, do make the track much more exciting and less static as well. So I'll just say that about Tampa. Duplex did pick itself up. The track has a bit more character, especially with the groove in the drum track. The bright synths that color the track with vibrance are nice as well. I dig the lush, synthy interlude passages on this track. I will say the track is more captivating than Tampa, at least. And I will say we don't really get much of a highlight until the third track, Postcard. Here we get some more traditional Small Black material here. It's the most upbeat tempo thus far, and it's danceable. I think when they're working within that realm, the band is kind of doing its thing the best. The drop into the chorus section hits quite nicely on this track as well. The anticipation that's created on like the softer pre-chorus moment right before the chorus really makes the anticipation into the chorus that much better as well. The drum track can feel a bit clunky at times with the different rhythmic variations thrown on the second verse. The ending is energetic, and we do get like a lush climatic outro as well. And the guitar textures on this track, the synths playing together, really remind me of some of the work that this band Goldfields from Australia did when they released their debut album. It really feels quite similar, and it's not a bad thing. Just thought that was an interesting similarity. We get a transition ambient interlude piece with Waterworks. It does go into another highlight called Driftwood Fire. On this track, there's a rumbly sub-bass on this track that creates a nice effect, making the track a bit more colorful in comparison to other tracks. And then again, this track just kind of sounds quite true to typical Small Black tracks. I like the lush gang vocals in the chorus. It cuts through things with a nice accent on this track, and it kind of feels like maybe some vocals that Fleet Foxes or a band like that would do. Probably a bit more of like an anthemic nature on this track as well. I dig the transition to the bridge section with the exposed deep bass guiding that part of the track, and how it contrasts with like the lush harmonized vocals thrown on. Nice climatic build-up on the outro here again with like the instrumental passage, so I thought that was a nice track. The bridge, another nice track, another highlight. A lot of usage of different textures. There's a ballad-like nature to it with the traditional keyboard sound and the vocals opening it up, and it creates a nice, unique moment in the overall context of the album. I love the introduction of the drum and bass on this track. It blends in so nicely with the intro. Nice usage of like the rumbly bass lines again on here. The piercing lead synth lines fit in quite nicely as well. There's also some patiently timed guitar chords thrown in and spaced out so nicely. And another lush instrumental outro passage. I think it works when they do that. Don't really get much of a highlight until Cheap Dreams. The track between that Service Merchandise. Kind of just felt that was a bit uninspired and middle of the road. But it does pick up on Cheap Dreams. Another highlight, Cheap Dreams, a bit more of an upbeat groove structuring the track here. Very dream pop inspired with like a hint of 80s stylization, kind of like similar to what Wild Nothing did on the third album, Life of Pause. I like the entering and exiting synth swells on here, the punchy bass groove all throughout the track, and just how the track is just vibrant everywhere, and the bright color that's on here. It's not a bad track. Nobody Love You. I love the bouncy eighth note groove in the bass that's structuring this track. A nice pre-chorus on here with its own character on it. I dig the squealing string-like synths that are used nicely over everything. The clicky percussive textures aren't bad as well. It gives the track some needed momentum, as well as like propulsion as it progresses. There's some ugly synth strings that give a darker color to the track that works in the context of the track. And then by the time we're at the end of this track, we get a dreamy interlude track titled Dunes that goes into Song to Ruin. I didn't quite find Song to Ruin to be a highlight, but I thought the track had a nice build up to the chorus, a steady driving sub bass. There's some chirpy and vibrant synth textures, but I really didn't think the payoff was as grand as I was hoping when we finally get to like the chorus or like the main idea of the track. I do dig the syncopated drum groove that happens like in places like in the second verse. I wish the album had more of that, because I think when there's some sort of momentum behind small block tracks, they're at their best. Nice closing track though. Not amazing, but better than I expected. And yeah, that's kind of just like the album overall. Not like a huge massive project, but a nice album to come back from for the band after being away for so long. Do I necessarily think it's in the upper echelon of like their best work? Not necessarily. I think this is probably like a mid-tier album for them. But overall, I thought it was positive. If I had to rate it, I'd give it maybe a 6 out of 10. I love the highlights that happened. Tracks like Postcard, Driftwood Fire, The Bridge. That little run there was nice. And then also some tracks that we got later with Cheap Dreams. Kind of, you know, threw in some influence from other bands that I think are great as well. So yeah, that's pretty much the gist of the review. I really hope the band continues to make music, and hopefully it's not another 6 years until we get another project from them. But yeah, I think if you are generally interested in Small Black or are interested with their work, this album, you know, might have something for you that you could enjoy. It is a bit different than some of their past albums, but you know, you don't want the same thing every single time either. But also, if you're interested into similar bands that are in like this dream pop, synth pop sort of, I guess, sub-genre sort of thing, this might have some stuff that you're going to be into as well. Like I said, it's all how you kind of digested the band before. I'm just a sucker for some of the earlier work or some of the work off of a certain album, but this may very well sit well with some people. Other than that, I don't know. I think this would be a hard album to digest if you're not into this sort of thing. I don't think it's very accessible to, say, someone that maybe just likes their meat and potatoes rock and roll, or maybe even indie rock. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. Nothing too serious. But if you stuck with me to the end of this review, thanks for tuning in. My name's Josh. I'm the music reviewer. I'll be reviewing some more stuff soon for you guys. And if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe if you're digging it. If you want to leave a comment, good or bad, just go ahead and do that. I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you're on your preferred listening service, subscribe on there too if you want to. But anyways, I'll see you later. Take care of yourselves.